Welcome again, Maxim here, and this video is about stripping armor. Be sure to stay until the end of it. I'm gonna ask you a very important question. Armor is one of the basic stats. It determines how much less damage will reach the target. At low levels, the value of the armor is not very impressive, so it is not much of a problem when eliminating hordes of enemies. However, at higher levels, on the steel path or on endless missions, the armor can be a noticeable problem, turning enemies into bullet sponges. To avoid this situation, the player can use one of the most important mechanics in the game, armor reduction. By stripping all of the armor of your opponents, you turn them into soft jellies. In this material, I will present currently available possibilities, techniques and abilities that will allow you to reduce or completely remove armor from your opponents. First, I will give you a quick example of why removing armor is so important. 100 armor on an enemy grants 25% damage reduction, 300 armor 50% and 900 75%. This seems to be quite a lot, but 900 armor is basically nothing compared to the values that opponents can have in endless missions. Example, the simplest type of Grenadier unit. By default, at level 1, it has 100 armor. Depending on this level, multipliers will be applied to his base stats. If this mob is level 70, the armor multiplier is times 10, which is 1000 armor, 77% damage reduction. Level 550 of this enemy have times 22 armor multiplier, which gives 2200 armor, 88% damage reduction. The difference between these values seems small, but let's see a heavier unit, Bombard. Base 500 armor, so 62.5% damage reduction in the easiest variant. At level 70 times 10 multiplier, it already has 5000 armor, which gives 94.34% damage reduction. With such values, the difference at higher levels will not be significantly larger. Although, at level 550, this unit, with a multiplier of times 22, already has 11,000 armor, 97.35% damage reduction. You will deal less than 3% of your regular damage to this unit. Let me remind you that the higher the level of enemies in endless missions, the faster they become more powerful. So let's move on to how to make the game easier and get rid of this modifier, or at least reduce it. Let's start with mods. The first will be Aura, Corrosive Projection. It reduces the current value of enemies' armor by 18%. The strength of this aura can be increased with Coaction Drift. The maximum reduction from it is set on 80%. You can achieve such value with 4 auras in a team with 3 coactions. This aura can be used as a help to reduce the overall enemy armor while using some Warframe abilities, which I will describe in a moment. Mod for Kavats, Sharpened Claws, gives them the ability to strip all armor from a single enemy unit. It works well with Swipe mod, making them attack multiple enemies. Both mods can also be used on Vulpophilas. Another one is Amalgam Argonac Metal Auger. Thanks to it, attacking an enemy with a dagger will strip 6 points of its base armor. You can get a similar effect with the Shattering Impact mod. You put it in a melee weapon, and if it has even a tiny bit of puncture damage, the enemy hit with it will lose 6 points of base armor. However, if you are using mods increasing slash or puncture damage in your build, the armor reduction effect may never work. But on such a simple build like this, it worked very well. This mod will be effective on weapons with high attack speed and high attack rate per second, so check which stance will be better. You can also use it on gunblades. These weapons fire multiple projectiles at once, and each pellet can reduce armor like a separate strike. Sarpa, for example, is very popular in this approach. Moving on, there are 2 status effects that reduce armor, Fire and Corrosion. They work on the actual amount of enemy armor, they don't modify the base value. Fire reduces 15, 30, 40 and 50% of armor every half of a second, counting from the moment of igniting. When the fire on the enemy burns out, he slowly regains his armor. The second status is Corrosion. First proc reduces armor by 26%, and each subsequent proc increases this value by 8%, up to 80. Same limitation as Corrosive Projection. Since projection, fire and corrosion will reduce armor percentages, projection and corrosion are capped at 80, and armor return to the default values when the status effect ends, you can't strip all armor with these techniques only, even if you use coaction drift. In the best case, you will leave enemies with 2% of their armor. I will mention here one more skill for armor removal, Caustic Strike. Second skill from the Unairo Operator School, removes 100% of enemy's armor within 8 meters. Before we move on, I want to mention the strategic use of armor stripping. Remember that in the game there are many types of armor. They have different vulnerabilities and resistances. Let's take a look at the Eidolons for example. His armor takes an additional 75% of damage if you hit him with radiation. However, if you remove all of his armor, this bonus disappears. Without it, you can attack his body with electricity. This one does 50% more damage. However, you will deal more damage when you leave some armor, literally a tiny bit of it, and shoot him with radiation. So keep that in mind, stripping whole armor is not always a good idea. Alright, it's time for Warframe skills that strip armor. Let's start with ones that do it by default without any augments. Caliban, the fourth skill, creates 2 beams that explode at the point of contact, which is where you aim. Enemies within the blast radius will be stripped of a percentage of their armor, or even all of it, if ability strength is equal to 100% or higher. Alternatively, you can use corrosive projection in the build, then 164% strength is enough. Avalanche, Frost 4th ability, strips 60% of enemy armor. Using it again, remove the rest of it. However, you can increase strength to 168% to remove all armor in first use. Or you can do 138% with corrosive projection. Works the same. Gauss. Here you need to use a combination of his skills. By tapping the third ability, you create a freezing area, while holding it, a fire area. Gauss recharges his battery by moving or casting a freezing area. You can fully charge it using the fourth skill. When you charge it to 100% and create both an ice and fire circle in one place, you will generate an explosion that will strip opponent's armor entirely. Grendel. The third ability turns him into a ball. Each enemy hit in this state loses 50% armor by default, all of it at 200% strength, or 164% with corrosive projection. But Grendel can also strip armor in some area, if you swallow a mob with your first ability and then spit it out with fourth ability. Enemies in close area from the spit point will lose their armor, 134% or more strength to strip all, or 110 with corrosive projection. Mag on default stats strips with the polarization, third skill, 400 points of shields or armor of the enemies. Every 100% more ability strength increases that value by another 400. Since it's a fixed number, not a percentage, the higher level enemies, the more times you'll need to use this ability to strip off all armor. There's also an augment for the fourth skill. Using it on enemies will cause them to lose 75% of their armor. This can be increased to 100 at 134% strength. Nick's second ability throws blades that reduce 80% of the target's armor. On one throw, 6 blades are thrown, locks onto its own target. You can bump up the amount of reduction to 100% by increasing your strength to 125. However, to strip armor from more enemies, you have to either kill the ones you hit earlier, or you can recast the ability, but here the armor removal is temporary. Casting the skill on subsequent enemies will restore armor to those previously hit. If you use Oberon's fourth ability on enemies that are affected by his second ability, you will take off 50% of their armor by default. With 200 ability strength, or 164 with corrosive projection, you strip all of it. Vauban. Enemies suspended in Bastille will lose 10% of their armor for each second they are suspended. Every 100% of strength is a 10% reduction, so at 200% strength it will reduce 20% each second, etc. Xaku on the third ability can choose Gaze. Trapped enemy will generate an aura at 200% strength, strips all armor and shields of nearby enemies. When the ability ends or enemies leave the area, their armor and shields return. Now let's move on to abilities that can reduce or remove armor, but with the help of some augments. Banshee. First skill augment. By default, it strips 70% of the armor. Increase strength to 143% or use the skill several times to remove it all. Protea. Each hit with her first and second ability, while using augmented fourth skill, reduce enemy armor by 10% for every 100 ability strength. Trinity. After augmenting her third ability, strips armor of the enemies connected to her. By default, it is a 60% reduction. With 168% of your ability strength, you'll strip it all for the duration of the skill. There are also Warframe abilities, both augmented and regular, which can be used to strip down the opponent's armor and can be transferred to other Warframes using the Helminth system. The only exception here is skill from Gauss. It is available from Helminth. However, battery mechanic is unique to Gauss. Any other Warframe with this ability deals damage like when the battery is 50% charged. And since the mechanics of removing armor with this skill require more charge, so only Gauss himself can do that. And a small addition about skills from Helminth, some abilities have their stats reduced compared to the original, or the way they work is slightly changed. But most of the next few skills work almost identical on other Warframes. Ember's third skill reduces armor by half, but this value can be increased. The second ability, when activated, displays a meter in the lower right corner. By using the first and the fourth skill, you'll speed up heating up. Once the bar is full, it is 90%, using the third ability will now remove all armor from enemies within the ability's range, but you can also cast it twice. In other Warframes, this skill always reduces armor by 75%, and you cannot increase this amount, so you always have to cast twice to remove all armor. Hydroid. The augment on his first ability causes it to apply corrosion on enemies, just like a weapon. This causes a loss of 26% armor on the first proc and 8% on each subsequent proc, up to maximum of 80%. So unfortunately, you won't be able to remove the all armor with this skill alone. Ash. The augment on the first ability removes 70% of the armor of the hit enemy for 8 seconds. Increase strength to 143% to strip it all. You can extend the duration of this effect with mods for the ability duration. Hildryn, by default, removes 25% of the armor or shields of the enemies within the range of the second ability. However, keep in mind that if the unit has shields, this skill will first reduce shields. The amount of reduction can be increased by increasing ability strength, but you need to raise it up to 400% to achieve 100% reduction with a single ability use. It is quite difficult. However, you can help yourself with the Mold Augmented Arcane. It can add up to 60% strength. Or you can add Corrosive Protection. Then 330% ability strength is enough. Or even 270 if you use Projection and Arcane together. When using this ability on another Warframe, one cast drains 50 energy instead 150 shields. Styanax, the second skill. Enemies within range lose 50% of their armor, all at 200% ability strength, or 164 with Corrosive Protection. Nekros. Terror, his second ability, removes 60% armor by default, from up to 20 enemies in range. He will strip it all at once with 168% ability strength, or 138 with projection. And that's all about stripping armor. Now a question for you. What topics would you like to see on my channel? What guides do you need? Feel free to write down in the comments what would you like to know about Warframe. I will just add that videos entirely dedicated to individual Warframes, as well as about individual groups of weapons, are already in the plans. But maybe you have some interesting ideas. Or have you searched for something on the internet recently and didn't find it? Or the amount of text to read just overwhelmed you and you would like this information, but in a nutshell? Be sure to let me down in the comments. In the meanwhile, take care and see you next time. Bye.